Okay, everybody, welcome to Bad Science Episode 2. Unlike the last episode where we looked at an entire phenomenon, we're going to take a more protracted look, and I think it's a good representation of the science or the climate of science around the issue of homosexuality and the science regarding the genetic basis of homosexual expression. Um, this is going to be a look at a video by National Geographic. In 2008, they presented a brief 7-minute overview of the biology behind sexual expression. I think it's important to look at this because um, it's pretty bad, and yeah, I think you'll enjoy. Let's start. Let's have a look at homosexuality on Nat Geo. Thanks a lot.
This 5-week milestone could be another stage where identical twins develop key differences before they're even born. Celso and Jesus Cardenas are identical twins who were raised together. They remained physically similar as they grew up, but their tastes and interests began to diverge. Celso became interested in dance and academia, while Jesus preferred sports. The most surprising difference between the two brothers is that Celso, wearing black, is gay. The differing sexual orientation of identical twins allows us to investigate one of science's most controversial questions. Are people born gay? Celso and Jesus were raised by the same parents in the same household, so they shared the same environment at a crucial time in their personal development.
I'm not sure if I need to comment on this, but I'll just put this in here because it'll become relevant later when we look at some of the more, nurture versus nature factors of homosexuality. Growing up in the same household does not mean the same environment. There will be similarities, but one of the threats to validity that was raised against twin studies, was that they needed to separate twins and raise them in different environments in order to show genetic similarities or dissimilarities, which they didn't do. Putting people in pseudo-similar environments and making inferences from it is not good laboratory science. But I'll talk about that more later.
In the general population, the chance of someone being gay is less than 5%, unless you have a gay twin. Then the chances are much higher. If you are fraternal, sharing half your genes, there's nearly a 25% chance that you will also be gay. If you are identical, sharing all your genes, there's about a 50% chance you will also be gay.
Okay, fun. Let's go back to what I was talking about nature versus nurture. Now, you notice that I put some little markers on there to give exact statistics about the percentages that National Geographic is quoting. The reason for that is because these statistics occur in only one study. There's a 1991 study by Pillard and Bailey, okay? And these gentlemen did a study of twins to determine that 52% of identical twins expressed homosexuality when one of the other did. 22% of fraternal twins expressed homosexuality when one of the others did. And interestingly enough, 11% of adopted siblings expressed homosexuality when one of the other ones did. Now, it was Annette Fausto Sterling of Brown University stated when examining this study that, I'm quoting her directly, that in order for such a study to be at all meaningful, you'll have to look at twins raised apart. Okay. Now, who conducted this study? Think about this. They're quoting a study by a gentleman who says this: there must be something in the environment to yield the discordant twins. Okay. The very study that they're quoting states that there has to be an environmental cause, and Nat Geo is reporting that as a biological cause. Okay. Now, in 2000, March 2000, Bailey tried to reproduce these studies. And this is the reason why I know that the study they're referring to is the Bailey and Pillar study, because, again, it's the only study that had these results. People have tried to reproduce this, right? So Nat Geo is presenting to you, and you should be offended, a study that is scientifically not reproducible. And this is a comment that he made in his 2000 study when he did the exact same study in Australia and found that that his identical twins, if you're an identical twin, the chances of you sharing homosexuality when one of your siblings does was reduced to 24% in men, and I believe it's 20% in women. Sorry, the other way around, 24% in women and 20% in men. Now, I'm going to quote this directly. These are the words of the researcher himself. This is from Dr. Bailey, to the best of my understanding. This is from Dr. Bailey. Consistent with several studies of siblings, we found that sexual orientation is familial. Okay? In contrast to most prior twin studies of sexual orientation, however, ours did not provide statistically significant support for the importance of genetic factors for that trait. This does not mean that our results support hereditability estimates of 0, though our results do not exclude them either. So basically, the study that Nat Geo is quoting here, right, the researcher behind this study has gone on to say that there is absolutely no reason that this study couldn't show that there is zero hereditability involved in these studies. We're talking about hereditability, not inheritance. So this is interesting as well, but I won't make that distinction. But so hereditability near 0 are the words coming out of the very researcher who put this study forth. And I'm shocked that Nat Geo would report a study where the researchers involved would write that. I mean, the people that did the research said that that there has to be something in the environment to yield these discordant twins. People in the peer review system have said that for these results to be meaningful, we need to separate the twins and we need to conduct these surveys in dissimilar environments, and that will show something about the epigenetics behind this. Epigenetics, by the way, being the inferences that we'll make because of the correlations that we observe in the populations, and therefore we'll infer that back to genetics. But leaving that aside, the peer review community has said, this is not a meaningful result. The researchers have said this is not producing the result that Nat Geo is claiming. So, without being a bit heavy-handed, I just want to say shame on Nat Geo for presenting the Bailey and Pillard study as empirical proof of homosexuality. The researchers themselves don't do that. And yes, the reason I know that this is the Bailey and Pillard study that they're referring to is because it is the only study, right? Because it's not been reproducible that has these results. So shame on you, National Geographic.
This suggests that there must be some genetic component to our sexuality. But it can't all be up to genes. Otherwise, every identical pair would either be both gay or both straight. Some other factor must be at play. In their first few weeks, all fetuses develop along similar lines. If nothing changed, each one of us would be born female. Fetuses with the male Y chromosome will form testes at about week 6 that produce the hormone testosterone. But at about the 8th week, the testosterone is released and may affect early brain development. Testosterone masculinizes the body. It also masculinizes the brain, including the hypothalamus, which partially controls who we find sexually attractive.
Zoinks! This is also interesting. I guess this is the point where I'll say that one of the things that you'll find when you're looking at the biology of homosexuality or the link between genetic factors and sexual expression is there's not a huge body of research out there. You could say very categorically that that basically the pioneers of this research are about 5 people. You have Bailey, you have Pillard, you have Dean Hamer, you have Simon LeVay, and I think I'm missing somebody out, but there's not a huge wealth of scientific information that has moved us towards this conclusion that um, that homosexuality is biological. One of the things that's always fascinated me is if you look at uh, academic journals about childhood sexual abuse. So the psychology of sexuality and the psychology of childhood sexual abuse. I can't remember any of the journal names, but you'll find a number of studies, a volume, and I recommend that if you have, do some research. I mean, go to your local library if you have access to peer-reviewed journals and type in homosexuality and abuse. And look at some of the statistics or some of the studies that have been done that show a correlation between childhood sexual abuse and later sexual orientation. And what you'll find is that there are, conservative statistics would put um, the level of childhood sexual abuse amongst homosexuals, male homosexuals, at 15%, and that's a very conservative estimate. For those that engage in risky homosexual behavior, so male on male anal intercourse, that goes up to 59% in certain studies. And I think that's obviously that's a very environmental factor, and I think points to the fact that it's very dangerous for us to take something that where we have a huge body of evidence that's saying that look, we have these environmental factors, we have these cases where things are happening within the environment and they're creating an effect or an outcome on the sexuality of individuals, and then we're playing it off as genetics. And I think what we're going to end up doing is, if we decide, and it's not the science is going to do this, but if we decide to say, turn a blind eye to the actual causes of sexual orientation, and say, well, if they're genetic, we're going to miss the opportunity to address some of these correlations. So, why do people with, why is there a much higher level of child sexual abuse, or histories of childhood sexual abuse amongst people that have um, that express homosexuality? I mean, that's an environmental factor. It's not nature. And I think what else is interesting is that when you look at male and female, the types of childhood sexual abuse that cause homosexuality are different as well, which is again an environmental factor. And I'll try and maybe put some of the so when I finish putting the videos together, I'll put some references at the bottom so you can look at some of this research. But this part of the video, you'll notice that they're talking about masculinization of the brain. They're talking about the hypothalamus. Again, because there's not a huge amount of work, there's maybe 4 studies that are continually used in order to support homosexuality. The study that they're talking about is the 1991 Simon LeVay study, which is what happened is Dr. LeVay went out and he did a whole bunch of dissections on cadavers. Now, he's been accused of asserting the sexual orientation of some of the cadavers post mortem. But I mean, let's assume that his science is above reproach, and that he doesn't have a bias in this case. But if we look at his research, basically what happened is he determined that the hypothalamus within homosexual men was larger than the hypothalamus within heterosexual men. Now, of course, to make this or extend this to a genetic argument is to say that there was a genetic cause to the size of the hypothalamus, which this study didn't show. It just observed that there was larger hypothalamus. Now, LeVay himself said, it's important to stress what I didn't find. I did not prove that homosexuality is genetic or find a genetic cause for being gay. I didn't show that gay men are born that way, the most common mistake people make in interpreting my work. Someone who reviewed, another doctor, I'm not sure if you reviewed his work or not, Dr. Kenneth Clevington said that there's a body of evidence that shows the brain's neural networks reconfigure themselves in response to certain experiences. Therefore, the difference in homosexual brain structure may be a result of behavior and environmental factors. So basically what he's saying is the size of the hypothalamus gland could very well be the fact of environment and practice as opposed to genetics. So that link hasn't been made. And again, for Nat Geo to say that, the hypothalamus controls our sexuality, yeah, that might be true, but it's not a genetic cause, right? It's a cause and effect. What came first, chicken and the egg? We haven't scientifically determined that in this case, and Nat Geo's jumping the gun in order to say one way or the other. Now, the interesting thing is that they've made this argument about the masculinization of the brain. So what they're saying is that potentially we have this situation where we have embryos that aren't receiving enough testosterone in the brain, therefore the hypothalamus isn't being properly masculinized, etc. So therefore they exhibit what's essentially female behavior, because the argument, of course, is that embryologically speaking, we all develop as females and then become males, and okay, so but this is absurd for a number of reasons. The first is that Nat Geo is making this connection between you have a study by Simon LeVay that says the hypothalamus is larger post-mortem in homosexuals. And the inference then is that, well, the hypothalamus controls sexuality. I'm not sure that we can make that. I mean, I think that's a bit of a stretch. But even if that was the case, to then go to say that, well, that has a result of testosterone production, well, if that were to be true, what we find is that people who suffer from Klinefelters or Turner's or tetrasomia or chromosomal deficiencies that mean that they have hypergonadism or problems with the development of their gonads would also have high rates or high preponderancy towards homosexuality, which is not the case. So essentially, we have a section of this it's existed in medical science. These chromosomal conditions where people have additional X or Y chromosomes, and they will actually have less testosterone, produce less of these hormones, and at the embryonic stage, and yet they don't exhibit any of these increased statistical preponderances towards homosexuality. Yet we're going to extend that argument towards twins. That's absolutely absurd. I mean, the science just doesn't back it up. So Nat Geo has made an inference which is contradictory to the vast bulk of biological science that we have. I'd love to do more studies on this, but I guess as someone who's not a biologist, I just think it's bizarre that Nat Geo will assert that the reason that we have homosexuality is because the embryos don't get testosterone. And yet we have a number of conditions where embryos don't get testosterone, and they don't have statistically higher levels of homosexuality. So, again, I don't see how that fits together. I think that's trying to take the Simon LeVay study and sort of shoehorn it in and say, well, we've got some science when actually we don't. I think someone who has a bit more understanding of the embryology of people with syndromes like Klinefelters and Turner's needs to look at that and make those conclusions. But that's pretty bad reporting.
Some scientists believe that the more the hypothalamus is exposed to testosterone, the more it sets the stage for a sexual inclination toward women. Occasionally, a male fetus doesn't produce sufficient testosterone, or its brain doesn't absorb enough to shape it along heterosexual lines. If this theory is correct, then it may be that Celso absorbed enough testosterone to masculinize his body, but not enough to fully differentiate his brain. As a result, he was left with a desire for men. Many mysteries remain, but twins like Celso and Jesus play a crucial role in informing scientists about how and when sexuality develops.
True, they do play a crucial role because one of the few scientific evidences that we have for homosexuality is twin studies. It would be better if we had something a bit stronger, but since twin studies is kind of all we got, they do play an important role.
Epigenetics reveals that even if their DNA code is the same, the way it functions can differ. The human genome contains around 25,000 genes, each with its own specific function, like producing energy or directing cell division. Now, geneticists are investigating a previously unknown aspect of the genome called the epigenome. A series of chemicals that act like switches are capable of activating or deactivating individual genes. One of these switches works by a process called DNA methylation. Enzymes inside a cell attach a minuscule molecular compound, a methyl group, to a gene. This compound can deactivate or at times activate the gene, but the gene itself remains. The cell's DNA profile is unchanged. The activation and deactivation of genes during early development could explain many twists of fate that affect us all. Why one person is struck by disease and another is spared. Epigenetics may also play a significant role in determining sexuality. If sexual preference is associated with an unidentified gene, it may be that the epigenetic suppression or activation of this gene dictates sexual preference.
Yeah, and it might be the result of fairies, it might be the result of magical elves, who knows, okay? Not necessarily a terribly strong argument. There's no strong scientific evidence linking, epigenetic factors to the expression of homosexuality. If they are, it's an issue of correlation and extracting that to causation. But I'd be interested in somebody showing some studies of that being the case. And I think what Nat Geo is doing here is they're taking a very vague genetic concept and attempting to say that it could potentially have consequences to homosexual expression without any evidence whatsoever to support that claim. This is bad science, it's bad television, and for people that are watching this, epigenetics they're referring to it as though it's an aspect of the gene. Yes, it's an aspect of the expression of the gene, but it's, epi means above or beyond, so we're talking about genes and their expression beyond their actual genetic makeup. So these inferences that they're making here and the conclusions that they're drawing are just shockingly weak. There's no evidence to support an epigenetic argument. If it is, it's the twin studies, which we've already looked at, and this is really poor reporting to show a number of pictures of genes and DNA double helix, and then say, well, look, we have a picture of a DNA double helix on screen, therefore we have some sort of genetic evidence. I recommend anyone that's interested in this argument look at the field of epigenetics and try and find some sort of correlation between homosexuality and genetics. It hasn't been shown.
These genetic switches may be the answer to why one twin absorbs more testosterone than the other, resulting in one being gay and the other straight. It's becoming clear that our health, personality, tastes, and even appearance aren't the product of our genes or our environment, but that nature and nurture are inextricably bound, with epigenetics the biological link between the two.
First off, I want to apologize and confess the sins on behalf of the church that I love and I'm a part of for the judgment and the condemnation against gay people. I mean, Jesus teaches us to love one another. He teaches us to love our brothers as ourselves, and our church hasn't done that, and I haven't done that, and so I want to apologize to you for that. I want to apologize for the church ignoring the AIDS crisis when it emerged 30 years ago and not only did we ignore it, we piled on and called it a gay plague, and we caused fear and anger and resentment and more hurt in a time when faith and love and compassion were what we're called for. And so I apologize that we failed our brothers and sisters in that regard.
Absolved.
No, I don't know what to say. It's different. I'm not used to hearing anyone who's a Christian ever say anything really nice. So
your apology about the AIDS thing really kind of touches me. I wish that more people had that feeling early on, having lost so many friends. Sorry.
Okay, this is Bad Science episode 2 conclusion. For those of you who decided to watch past the credits, I just want to read to you something from Romans 1 and just sort of point out why episodes 1 and 2 are important. Bear with me, I'll put it in context for you, and I think it's a verse that's been used a lot in dealing with morality and culture, and I'd like to sort of just sort of say what it means to me and what I think it means to those of us that are amongst my peers who might be watching this or who are considering these issues. This is Romans 1:21. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness, and the lust of their bodies, to shine their bodies amongst themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use of what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving themselves the penalty of their error which was due. I'm going to skip 4 verses. Who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. Now, I think the Bible is 100% clear that homosexuality is wrong, and that there is consequences. But anyone who's a Christian, anyone who follows Jesus Christ, is in the position where if they appreciate the grace of Jesus Christ, and if they look at Jesus Christ and go, "Thank you, Lord, for saving me from wherever I came from, whatever pit I crawled out of," they crawled out of a pit as well. And to make a distinction between the homosexual and the pornographic, the pornography addicted, the adulterous, the fornicator, sleeping with somebody before they're committed to them, that distinction doesn't exist in any real sense in Christianity. I think one of the important things also is that when the Bible talks about pornographic, when it talks about afflictions of the sexual nature, it uses words like porneia, which is just a catch-all word that encompasses a huge amount of sexual perversions and proclivities. And the things to take away from this is reading Romans 1:21 through 32 there, and skipping a bit in the middle if you want to read it, that's fine. The point that is really made about this is it's a verse that, although it's talking to people personally about abandoning God, it's also talking to a culture where the culture has moved from God, and in so doing, the culture has inherited and reaped the benefits the negative effects of that. And I think that looking at the science of homosexuality sort of illustrates that. We see a culture where people are, one of the main reasons, identified factors why people will express homosexuality is because of childhood sexual abuse. That's inheritance. You've inherited a sexual disposition through your culture. And I think that's what the Bible is identifying. And I think that for those of you that are watching this on homosexuality, I've made the point clear. I think at this point that I've had sexual addictions in the past, and that one of the best things that someone was ever able to do to me was to come to me and say, "That's wrong. That's not who you are. That's not what your life is about. It's not what God made you, whether you believe in God or not. That's not your identity." And you got to walk away from that. And I think that the same thing is true of someone who suffers from homosexual desires. It's not your identity. It's not biological. And I think the real dangerous precedent as a culture that will continue to insist that it is biological. Again, the Bible identifies this for those of you that are Christian or looking at the biblical precedent that it's a cultural inheritance. These sexual perversions that we accept and legitimize, it's a result of people who have gone before us, recognizing God and running away. It's not a personal indictment, although it can be. But I just, I made the decision to get involved in sexual immorality at, let's say, the age of 11. But I grew up in a culture that made that very easy for me, and I take personal responsibility for it, and as a result, could walk away from it. But there is a dynamic that to accuse someone for the homosexuality that they inherit through their environment, through their circumstances, is no different than the pornographic, afflictions that I might have or addictions, that I might have. I take responsibility for it and I walk away from it. And I think that for those heterosexual individuals or those people that are heterosexual that have varying tendencies towards homosexuality, I think that when we thumb a nose at it, we're missing the fact that the Bible says that all fall short of the glory of God, and wages of sin is death. Every single one of us, when standing before God, deserves eternal condemnation and death because we really don't match up to God. I mean, if we stand next to Him, the difference between Him and me is infinite, and the only way that I can bridge that is through Jesus Christ. And that gap that exists for someone who practices homosexuality exists for someone that is involved with sleeping around, on their wife type of thing. And I think that I guess the encouragement I want to give to people who are watching this is that it's our cultural inheritance. I mean, in the West, we have culturally inherited this idea that homosexuality is genetic, and that and it's interesting that biblically that's something that was Jesus pointed out that Paul pointed out some 2,000 years ago, and we see that today that we really inherit this sexuality, whether it's homosexuality or I love talking about people with pornographic desires, and they try and legitimize their addiction to pornography. And then my comment is, well, you live in a culture that at the age of 11, statistically, you were exposed to pornographic material. Someone's making money off of the fact. I mean, the largest demographic of porn users is 12 to 18. Someone's making money off of the fact or banking on the fact that you are going to have a physical response, right, to a sexual stimulus before statistically you even have entered sexual maturity. And you've lived your existence in this situation where you have always had an affinity towards this illicit sexual expression, and yet you think that there's an objectivity about your perspective. And I think that one of the things that we have to recognize is that the biblical mandate is that knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same thing, but also approve of those who practice them. We say that this is fine, this is all right, we can do this, we can get away with this. You know what? The sin of homosexuality is the sin of, pornography, is the sin of fornication, it's the sin of sleeping around before you're married, it's the sin of cheating on your wife, it's the sin of abusing, young children. It's all the same thing. And we are inherent. I mean, we live in a culture where we grow up thinking that's all right. And I think, I guess I'm tired of hearing dissent from people who really don't have anything but a cultural perspective on this, who have been raised in a culture that, statistically at the age of 11 exposes them to sexually explicit material for financial, reasons or cultural reasons or whatever. And yet and we live in a culture where, people would be abused. There are child sexual abuse statistics and then because of that, we're inheriting things like addictions, whatever. And then we think we have an objective perspective on this. And I think that when I take a biblical perspective and I look at this and say that, Paul, in the Bible is saying that, people before us have turned away from God, and we inherit a situation where, we're getting the penalty of sexual expression. It's hard for me to seriously accept dissenting opinion from I guess people that come from a demographic of being imbibed in that cultural sexuality. So I've identified a culture that that has problems with its expression of sexuality. I think homosexuality is in some cases an expression of that. Um, and I think sometimes there is the personal responsibility for someone who's homosexual to to deal with that. But at the same time, not to denigrate from the personal responsibility that someone is a homosexual or involved in pornography. I don't want to denigrate from that, but I think the false idea that 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 people like myself, in their mid-30s and under, that we have this objective perspective on sexuality in a culture that will expose us and play on our biological, hot buttons before we even reach sexual maturity, doesn't afford us an objective perspective. So that when somebody takes a perspective, whether it's biblical or Christian or historical or whatever type of thing, and says, "Well, hey, wait a second, let's look back. Let's be a bit introspective." I think it's a healthy thing and a good thing. And I think that unless someone can say that they've experienced a sexuality that is different than cultural norms, they don't have a huge amount of ability to dissent on the idea that, hey, wait a second, maybe homosexuality is not healthy. Hey, wait a second, maybe pornographic addiction is not healthy. Hey, wait a second, maybe cheating on my wife is not healthy. Because we have to, when we do science, we always have a bias in it, and we have to recognize that we need to separate those two things. And at the bottom line, just the point I'm trying to make is that all of us inherit some sort of, sexual mores in this culture, and we need to really divide that, and in so doing, attempt to recognize what is healthy sexuality. And I'd argue it's not homosexuality, it's not pornographic addiction, it's not incest, it's not a number of things that you could put under the abnormal box. And as a Christian, I think they're the only plausible, healthy, sexual relationship is first to have a desire and an affinity towards God is ultimate, and then through that to express your sexuality either in an asexual manner, so abstaining from it and just really enjoying God and what He's got for you, or in a heterosexual manner where you're committed and the person that you're expressing yourself sexually to, you have a bond that you're going to recognize and serve for the rest of your life, regardless of emotions or proclivities, whatever the case may be. And I think in Jesus Christ is the only place we're going to find a healthy sexuality. And I think that if you disagree with that, please recognize your culture. Do you have the cultural, the absence of cultural baggage that allows you to disagree with that? And if not, I think that it's something that's so personal, and I think a lot of people would like to think that our sexuality is not directly tied to our personhood and our personality, and it is. And this is when you recognize that, and when somebody has sexual addictions, we need to recognize there's a person that needs help and understanding as a person, not to be labeled as a scientific anomaly or whatever the case may be. Especially when we're seeing things like a culture that can identify childhood sexual abuse with sexual expression, and it's really dangerous that a culture that has so many sexual proclivities itself is making these judgment calls on sexual practices that are a subset of it. But I'll leave it at that. The point I want to make is that I really feel that the basic healthy sexual expression can only be found first by having a relationship with Christ. And you might find that heavy-handed, but the idea behind that is that I think that a healthy sexual relationship is one that is giving, that is it's not about what one receives, but it's about caring and loving somebody. And I think that the only way you can do that is if you have a relationship with somebody who's who can provide you with the love that you need to pass on to somebody else. And I think you're going to find that in Jesus Christ. I don't think any of us are strong enough or big enough to be sources for anyone else. And when God says that His first commandment, don't have any other gods before me, I'm the boss. The reason He's saying it is because it's not a selfishness or egocentrism. He's basically saying that I recognize myself as God as the ultimate concern. If I'm actually that good, it kind of makes sense for you to direct your affection towards me. And from that situation where God has affection for us and we have affection for God, we can then have a healthy sexuality outside of that. I don't want to say anything more about this because this video is about homosexuality. I'm just really trying to speak to those, I guess, at this point who have heterosexual proclivities, because I'm finding that, again, like I've mentioned, that 99% of the, or at least 97% or 96% of the people that are, a vast majority of people who have comments on homosexuality are themselves not homosexual, and I think that's a bit dangerous. I made comments before that when I was an undergrad at the University of Toronto, I was identified as a homosexual. I never practiced as a homosexual. There's a clinician who said that I was homosexual, and but I don't want to get into that. That's a completely different issue. Anyway, I love you guys. I hope you hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to responses and hearing what you have to say. God bless. I really hope this is an interesting video, and if you get a chance, check out Romans 1:21-32. It's a great verse, just talking about our cultural and our inheritance and that sort of things, the cultural baggage we got. Okay, love you guys heaps. Thanks. Bye.